Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I don't know about you, but have you ever felt that really just chilling grip of fear? That feeling where your blood runs cold? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the feeling that I Think I Killed Her by Kenneth Preston hits you with right away.
Oh, wow.
It just throws you right into this world of shattered trust, broken memories, and just a past that won't stay buried.
It's so true. And what's really fascinating right from the start is just how the author creates this suffocating sense of dread. You're immediately in Rachel's shoes. Like, you can feel that sense of being trapped in this terrifying cycle.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we are diving deep into a thriller today.
Absolutely. A real page turner.
So if you are enjoying this exploration, please hit that like button and subscribe to get more deep dives like this one delivered right to you.
Yeah, we'd love to go deep.
We are going to be dissecting the first few chapters of I Think I Killed Her by Kenneth Preston. And of course, you can find a link to buy the book down in the description below.
Definitely check it out. But you know what? It's not just about solving a crime.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
Preston does something really clever. He weaves in these really complex themes right from the beginning.
I agree.
We're going to be looking at toxic relationships, the tricks our minds can play on us with memory and perception, the constant threat of violence, and that struggle for inner strength.
Absolutely. So we've got excerpts from the early parts of the book, and they really give us this fascinating, often unsettling look through the eyes of both Rachel and Billy.
It's a dual perspective, which always adds intrigue.
Right. What unfolds is this story of escalating fear, memories that feel like shifting sands, and this really looming possibility of a truly terrible act.
And it grabs you from the first page.
It does.
So our goal with this deep dive is to kind of get under the skin of these initial mysteries and that intense emotional landscape.
Yes.
We want to help you understand the core conflicts that are driving both Rachel and Billy and explore the psychological states they're in during these early chapters.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with Rachel's experience in chapter 1.
Okay, sounds good.
So right away on the first page, you are plunged into her fear. This really, really real fear that she's being stalked by her ex-boyfriend Billy, and this isn't new to her.
Right.
She even thinks to herself, this is not your first rodeo. And I think that line really speaks volumes about her past.
It really does. It instantly suggests this history, this pattern of unhealthy and potentially dangerous relationships.
Yes.
It hints at a grim familiarity with this kind of fear.
For sure. So how about the setting where she's at Suffolk County Community College? How did that strike you?
Well, I think the setting adds a layer of tension to this whole situation.
Right.
It's nighttime, she's alone
Mm.
after teaching this literature class, which she obviously doesn't like.
Right.
And that walk to her car, it becomes this journey into the unknown, you know?
Yeah, every shadow is a potential threat.
Every shadow is a potential threat. Even though she's on a college campus, you get this real sense of isolation and vulnerability.
Right, and then she has this confrontation with Billy. What were your initial thoughts on that encounter?
Well, it's immediately uncomfortable, isn't it? The smell of alcohol on him, even though he's supposedly recovering,
Yeah.
that's jarring. And then him grabbing her arm and causing her pain.
Yes.
That's a physical threat right there. It's
Yeah.
not just words.
Exactly. You see those manipulative tactics coming out, too.
You do, don't you? Please the emotional blackmail with the threats of suicide. It's all about control.
Absolutely. So how does Rachel respond internally to this?
Well, she freezes, doesn't she?
She does.
She's torn between wanting to run
Yeah.
and being frozen by fear. And we get this really vivid flashback to her abusive ex-husband, David.
Yeah.
And it really highlights how past trauma can dictate your reactions in the present.
Absolutely. And then there's that chilling moment where she forces herself to say, Billy, I love you.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's just for survival.
It's purely a survival tactic.
Right. Think about how heavy those words are. They're not out of love, but out of sheer terror.
Really powerful stuff. And from there, the situation just escalates rapidly.
He gets so angry, he calls her, you cold bitch, grabs her face, and then the unthinkable happens.
Oh, yeah.
The blow to the temple, and her last thoughts are, then I see red, then I see nothing.
It's a brutal blackout. And as a reader, you are just left reeling.
Totally. It's like,
Yeah.
what happened next? Is she okay?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where Preston takes us into chapter 2, right into Billy's perspective.
Right.
And it's a stark contrast to Rachel's clear, terrifying experience.
Yes. His mind is clouded with darkness.
It is his memories of the night before are fragmented,
Yeah.
unreliable, because of all the alcohol.
He even mentions this persistent pain in his chest.
He does. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, and he says it's always been there, but his feelings for Rachel make it so much worse.
And then you've got the fact that he's a blackout drinker,
Right.
which makes him an unreliable narrator.
It does.
He's not just dealing with a hangover. He's genuinely terrified of what he might have done while he was blacked out.
So what does he remember about that night?
Well, he remembers bits and pieces, right? Like
Right.
leaving the bar and being fixated on seeing Rachel outside the Humanities building.
Yeah.
He's surprised he even managed to drive there in his state.
Right, and he remembers some of the confrontation with Rachel. He felt pathetic and desperate.
Yeah, but the details of what happened after that are just gone.
Right, it's like trying to grab smoke.
It is. And that fear is so palpable in his narrative. He
Yeah.
knows something bad happened, but the specifics are just out of reach.
So what about his physical state when he wakes up? How's he feeling?
Where, classic hangover, throbbing headache, nausea.
Yeah.
He wakes up on the couch and immediately thinks about his wife, Rose, and how she's going to react.
Right.
It's obvious his sobriety was so fragile, and this slip-up has huge implications for him.
And that interaction with Rose is pretty revealing.
It is, isn't it?
She knows he struggles. She looks worried.
She does, and he avoids telling her the truth. He blacked out.
What did you think about their dynamic in that conversation?
Well, there's this unspoken tension between them.
I agree.
He's definitely hiding something more serious than just a relapse.
Right.
Rose is concerned. She asks specific questions, and he's just deflecting,
Yeah.
creating this atmosphere of suspicion and mistrust.
It's interesting because even with this fog in his mind, Billy keeps experiencing these disturbing memories.
He does, doesn't he? But he just pushes them away.
And then he has this really strange dreamlike image. What was that about?
So in this fragmented memory, he sees someone attacking Rachel
Oh, wow.
with a rock.
With a rock.
Yeah, he tries to intervene, falls down, and the rock hits Rachel.
Oh, my gosh.
But he's completely unsure if it actually happened or if it was just a nightmare fueled by guilt and the alcohol.
That unreliability is so key to this thriller.
It is. It really keeps you on the edge of your seat, not knowing what's real and what's not.
So what does he do to try and figure things out?
Well, he does what anyone would do in a panic.
Right.
He frantically checks the news online,
Of course.
looking for any reports of an incident near the college. He needs some kind of confirmation.
Right.
And then he decides he has to go to the college himself.
Okay.
He needs to see for himself if anything happened.
So let's jump ahead a bit to chapters 8 through 10. This is where things get really intense for Billy, and some pretty damning evidence starts to appear.
Absolutely. There's this real shift in the narrative.
Billy is overcome by this urge to wash his hands.
Yeah, he can't stop.
He keeps seeing and feeling blood, even though Rose tries to rationalize it away.
Right, like his body is betraying him.
Exactly. And then comes the discovery that really sends chills down your spine.
Boy, this...
Some blood under his fingernails.
Oh, no.
It's a tiny detail, but it just triggers this huge wave of panic and disbelief in him.
Right, he tries to scrub it away, but that image is seared in his mind.
Exactly. And this is where things change for Billy. His fear of Rose grows, and he's terrified of facing what he might have done.
His internal struggle is so intense.
It is. So then what happens? What does he do next?
Well, he needs to find Rose. He becomes consumed by this need to find her.
And he's scared to drive, which isn't like him.
No, it's not. And then he has this incredibly disturbing image of Rachel in his trunk.
Oh, God.
It's like a hallucination, almost blurring the lines between reality and his worst fears.
This image is so powerful, it really drives his actions. What does he do?
He has to know, he has to check the trunk.
Oh, my God.
And when he opens it, he doesn't find Rachel.
Right.
But he finds his gray hoodie, the one he was wearing that night, and it's covered in blood.
This is like a huge turning point.
This isn't a nightmare anymore. It's real, tangible evidence.
So now we are getting into chapters 11 through 16.
Okay.
This is where the suspicion against Billy really starts to ramp up and the interrogation begins.
The walls are closing in.
They are. When he sees that blood on his hoodie, it seems to break through his denial.
Yeah.
He remembers killing his father, and it creates this terrifying parallel.
That past trauma is resurfacing, and it's haunting him.
And then the outside world starts to reflect his internal fears.
Absolutely. The news reports. Rachel's disappearance. They find blood at the scene near the college.
Oh, no.
And it's just intensifies his guilt and fear.
Right. It's all coming together, and it doesn't look good for him.
So what happens when Rose confronts him about Rachel?
Well, it's super tense. She doesn't believe his lies anymore.
She's a smart woman.
She is. And Billy's torn between confessing to the affair and the possibility of something much worse.
He's in a terrible position.
He is. And then Detective Ryan arrives, which changes everything.
Oh, yeah. Now it's official.
Right. Billy knows he's a person of interest now.
Not just a worried boyfriend.
Nope. And the questioning begins, and you can feel his internal struggle. He wants to tell the truth, but he's so scared of the consequences.
It's a classic battle between guilt and self-preservation.
So how does he describe the attack during the interrogation?
Well, his memory is still distorted. He talks about this dark, hooded figure with piercing eyes,
Okay.
which conveniently shifts the blame away from him, even though it sounds really far-fetched at this point.
Right, but despite all the evidence against him, he doesn't confess.
It's a desperate attempt to save himself.
Yeah, a gamble born out of fear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what happens at the end of the interrogation? Does he crack?
He agrees to take a polygraph test.
Wow, a high-stakes move?
It shows that there's a tiny bit of hope left in him that he can prove his innocence.
Okay, so let's shift back to Rachel's perspective.
Okay.
We need to go back to Chapter 7.
Okay.
This chapter is so important for understanding her character.
I agree.
Before we see what happens to her after the attack, we need to understand her past.
Right, we learn about her traumatic childhood with an abusive father.
Yeah, and these violent fantasies she had as a coping mechanism.
Like the gasoline and matches.
Exactly. It shows just how much fear and powerlessness she felt as a child.
She creates this tough exterior to protect herself.
Right, mirroring her mother's behavior.
It's like a shield against the constant threat.
It's interesting, though, because despite this strength, she makes a decision that seems to contradict it.
What do you mean?
Well, she decides to go to a bar looking for casual sex.
Oh, yeah.
It really highlights her deep fear of intimacy, which stems from her past trauma.
Right.
And then she meets David.
Right.
And her reaction is so visceral, it suggests a really significant and possibly negative history there.
Okay, so now let's go to chapter 17. This is right after the attack.
Okay.
Rachel wakes up injured and confused in this creepy basement.
It's a terrifying situation.
She's weak. She has a concussion. She's lost a lot of blood. She's completely at the mercy of whoever took her.
It's every victim's worst nightmare.
What are her instincts in this moment?
Survival.
Right.
She has to escape. Even though she's so weak, she's desperately trying to find a way out of that basement.
That inner strength is still there.
It is, and it leads to a confrontation with her captor.
Right.
It's heavily implied that this is David, someone from her past who has abused her before.
Oh, wow.
And there's this really powerful moment where Rachel grabs a shard of glass.
Okay.
It's a small act of resistance.
Right.
But she ends up submitting again. It's a heartbreaking reminder of the lasting impact of abuse.
So that moment with the glass is so important. Even though it's brief, it shows that she still has that fight in her.
It does. So what happens? Does she manage to escape?
She does. Eventually, she gets out of the basement in the woods, although we don't get all the details in these early chapters.
Okay, so fast forward to chapter 37.
Okay.
How does she react to the news about Billy?
It's complicated. She's obviously terrified of him and what he did to her.
Right.
But when she learns about his suicide, she feels genuine sadness.
Wow, that's surprising.
Yeah, she acknowledges that he hurt her, but she also recognizes that he tried to help her later on.
So it's a mixed bag of emotions.
It is. It shows how complex their relationship was.
And how about her confrontation with David, her ex-husband, in chapter 27?
That scene is really powerful. It's like a moment of transformation. Well, she stands up to him in the pouring rain, and it's like she finally becomes that fierce warrior that her mom talked about.
Right.
She's breaking free from her past.
She's reclaiming her power.
Exactly. And what about Rose, Billy's wife? What do you think about her role in all of this?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
She seems to be much more perceptive than she lets on.
Right. Billy is paranoid. He's scared of her. She seems to know things.
It feels like she's putting the pieces together.
And do you think she's actively involved in what happens?
I think it's very likely. Remember the bloodstained hoodie in the trunk?
Oh, yeah.
And later on, we hear about an anonymous tip.
Right.
It all points to Rose taking action, maybe out of jealousy, maybe anger, maybe she's protecting herself.
It definitely adds another layer of suspense to the story.
It does. So what stands out to you about how the author is crafting this thriller?
Well, the constant shifting between Rachel's fear and Billy's confusion is really effective.
It is. You're constantly questioning what's real, what actually happened that night.
And both narrators are unreliable.
Absolutely. Rachel's past trauma influences how she sees things, and Billy's blackouts create these huge gaps in his memory.
So as a listener, you're constantly trying to fill in those blanks. You're part of the mystery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what are some of the questions you're left with at this point?
So many questions. Did Billy really kill Rachel? Was the hooded figure real or just a figment of his imagination?
And who is this other David? What's his connection to Rachel?
And what about Rose? What is she really capable of?
There's a feeling that we've only scratched the surface of this story.
And what about the characters' motivations? What drives them?
Right. What makes Billy so destructive? What's at the root of Rachel's fear?
It feels like there's so much more to uncover.
So after this deep dive into I think I killed her, what do you think really happened that night?
What do you think happened?
And think about the darkness that each character faces. Is it something external or is it internal? And what does that say about the nature of violence?
It's a question that I think will stay with you long after you finish the book.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us for this intense deep dive.
It was a pleasure.
We really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let us know your favorite moment or your biggest surprise in the comments below.
Yeah, we love hearing from you.
And please share this deep dive with anyone you know who loves a good thriller and enjoys unpacking a good mystery.
Absolutely. Spread the word.
Thanks again for listening.